Welcome to Bizarre Podcast.
Hello guys and welcome back to Bizarre Podcast. I've just come back from taking the kids to school this morning. Both of my children have now gone back. My little girl went back last week, but she only made it through an hour or two and then I had to go and pick her up because she was feeling a bit ill. I think it was just nerves, but now both of the kids have gone back and the house is eerily quiet. It's quite spooky, to be honest, how quiet it is. I'm so used to there being a lot of noise in the house with the kids being at home. But now they've gone back and we can start recording again and get some episodes out for you guys. Today, the story is about a dog which lived in Japan in 1923. Hachiko was his name. Now, because the story took place in Japan, there will be a few Japanese words in there, and I'm not making any promises that I can pronounce these words, but I will try my best. I just thought I'd let you know that before we go any further. So, without further ado, let's start today's episode. Hachiko. Dogs have always been known as man's best friend, ever since hunter-gatherers and wild wolves found a common interest, which was food. It is believed after the hunter-gatherers killed their hunt and left behind the carcass, the wolves would appear later and strip whatever meat was left. It is also believed that the wild wolves decided it was probably a very good idea to stick close to these hunter-gatherers to ensure they were fed. And lastly, it's believed that the hunter-gatherers also saw a benefit of having these wolves close by. And of course, it wasn't long before the wolf was domesticated and the bond was established. Although nowadays, the bond may be slightly different. Dogs are now mostly considered as another member of the family. They can also be considered a close friend and a loyal companion. A dog's love can be unconditional and unfaltering and can last a lifetime. And on today's episode, I'm going to tell you the story of a dog that's love for his owner did just that. Today I'm going to tell you the story of Hachiko. But first, let me tell you about Hachiko's owner, and his name was Hachiburo Ueno. Ueno was born January 19, 1872. In 1895, Ueno graduated from Tokyo Imperial University's Agriculture Department. He then went on to study agriculture engineering. On July 10, 1900, he finally finished his graduate work, and all his hard work paid off, and he come full circle and took a job teaching at the Tokyo Imperial University, where he started his educational journey. Around 1915, Ueno would meet Hachiko Sakano, and Hachiko Sakano would become the unmarried partner to Ueno for the rest of his life. From what I can gather, Ueno and Hachiko Sakano met around the same time as he became the professor of the university's agricultural department, which would have been sometime between 1915 and 1916. So, Ueno met the love of his life and achieved his promotion to professor possibly in the same year, or very close to that. So life must have been very good for Ueno. And from what I can gather, this was a very great man. He was very dedicated and he accomplished anything that he put his mind to. Ueno's experience in agricultural engineering actually helped in rebuilding drainage systems after the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake. So Ueno was already making an impact in the pages of history. Now, around 2 months after the great tragedy of the Kanto earthquake, something that devastated Japan, something very pure was about to come into the world, and I like to think of this as the yin-yang symbol, like a kind of balancing where you can have darkness and then you can have lightness. So, around 2 months after the Kanto earthquake, a Japanese Akita puppy was born on a nearby farm on November the 10th, 1923. In 1924, Ueno would visit this farm to purchase his beautiful Akita puppy and take his new friend home with him. And it was on this day a very special, very precious bond was established. Ueno named his beautiful Akita puppy Hachi, although the dog is better known as Hachiko, and that is what we will be naming him from now on, and I will explain towards the end of the episode why the name was changed later on. When fully grown, Hachiko was a golden light brown dog with a dash of peach colour to his face, and he stood at 2 feet 1 inches tall and weighed around 90 pounds. Right from the beginning, the bond between Hachiko and Ueno must have been very clear to see. Wherever Ueno went, Hachiko was sure to follow. Every day, Ueno would make his way to the train station to start his daily commute to the university, and every single day Hachiko would follow by his owner's side. When Ueno reached the station, I like to imagine that he said his goodbyes to Hachiko, maybe patted his loyal friend on the head, and then boarded the train. Ueno would then begin his journey to the university and commence his busy day teaching in the agricultural lectures. After finishing his classes, he would then take the train back and return back at the station at 3 p.m. exactly, and every day at 3 p.m. Hachiko would be patiently waiting for his master at the train station. And I can only imagine the happiness and excitement that must have filled Hachiko as Ueno approached him and greeted him, and then they would start their walk back home, and then, the next day, do it all over again. The pair did this every single day. Ueno would say bye, board the train, go to work, and then return to be greeted by Hachiko every day at 3 p.m. without fail. This probably continued for about a year, until one day, Ueno would say his goodbyes for the very last time. On May the 21st, 1925, Professor Ueno died at work of a cerebral hemorrhage. Ueno would not be returning to Hachiko again. But of course, Hachiko didn't know this, and that day, Hachiko waited at the station for his owner to return. I mean, you can almost imagine it from the point of view of Hachiko, sat there waiting whilst all the commuters spill out of the station, and Hachiko desperately scanning the crowd looking for his owner, and the confusion he must have felt as the last passenger left the station, but Ueno was nowhere in sight. And obviously to me and you, Ueno was not going to be returning to meet Hachiko at the train station ever again, but of course Hachiko wouldn't have known this or understood this. And so, every day for the next 10 years, Hachiko would turn up at the station desperately looking for his owner, hoping he would return to him. Now, apparently after Ueno's death, Hachiko was given away to a few different families. However, this didn't stop the dog from escaping and finding his way to the train station to try and meet his master every day at 3 p.m. Now, at first, Hachiko's presence at the station was met with anger by some of the commuters and station staff, and there are also some reports of cruelty towards the dog, such as beatings, because initially he was seen as a nuisance and possibly a stray due to his appearance. I think he was a little bit scruffy at times. However, it wasn't long until this all changed and people started to hear Hachiko's story and realised the dog was nothing but loyal to his dead master and longed to be reunited with him. People started to appear from far and wide just to see Hachiko. You see, Hachiko was now becoming somewhat of an icon at the train station. It wasn't long before people started bringing food for Hachiko as he waited at the station for his owner's return. People would also pose for photographs and just in general like to show their love towards the dog, and Hachiko was always a friendly dog who took it all in his stride. It wasn't long before one of Professor Ueno's students heard the stories of Hachiko waiting at the station and decided to have a look for himself. He boarded the train at the university and arrived at the station at 3 p.m. to have the stories confirmed. As he exited the station, he could see the Akita dog patiently sat there looking for his owner. The student patiently waited until Hachiko decided it was time to leave the train station, and as Hachiko walked away, Ueno's student followed. The student followed Hachiko for quite some time, and eventually Hachiko arrived at his new home, which was Ueno's former gardener. Ueno's old gardener then filled the student in on the story of Hachiko's life before and after Ueno's death. The student then went on and published Hachiko's story to a few newspapers, and it wasn't long before Hachiko's story spread throughout Japan. And this is when the story of Hachiko became even more well known than he already was. You could say the dog became famous. The number of people that visited Hachiko at the station went up considerably, and it became also like a symbol of loyalty and love in Japan. People would come from far and wide just to meet Hachiko. I also heard stories of school children visiting Hachiko, because apparently the teachers thought this was a valuable lesson to teach the children about loyalty and love, which I thought was very nice. It is also said from time to time Ueno's widow, if you like, although unmarried, would turn up at the train station just to see Hachiko, and whenever she did this, Hachiko would greet her with a lot of affection and love, always happy to see her. Now, I often wondered how Ueno's partner could get rid of Hachiko, how she had the heart to get rid of the dog, but you've got to understand that these were different times back then, so maybe it was circumstances we can't understand why she did it, but the fact that she still turned up to see the dog showed some kind of love that she still had for Hachiko, and obviously Hachiko still had this love for her. So I don't think we should speculate or judge on why she gave Hachiko up, because it's obvious that she still cared for the dog, because there are stories of her turning up at the station on many different occasions, and she was always greeted with love from the dog. Now obviously, as we all know, time passes by fast, and old age came upon Hachiko, but this didn't stop him from walking to the train station every single day for almost 10 long years, hoping today was the day his owner would finally return to collect him. However, as time did pass by, his popularity did not decrease. In fact, Hachiko was always a friendly dog with anyone who ever visited him. The internet has plenty of photographs with Hachiko posing with his admiring fans, who came from far and wide to meet him, and they fed him treats, and people turned up to see Hachiko even in his old age. Time had taken its toll on Hachiko. He was now an old dog, riddled with arthritis and probably more ailments, but still, his loyalty for his dead master didn't falter, and every day at the same time, Hachiko would still arrive at the station and eagerly wait. In 1934, Hachiko had been waiting for his master every day for 9 years, and it was in 1934 that a statue was erected in honour of the faithful dog. A bronze statue that had the likeness of Hachiko. And perfectly, on the day that the statue was unveiled, Hachiko actually turned up. He arrived at the station and witnessed the whole thing, and there are actual pictures of that day, which I will link in the show notes, where you can actually see Hachiko arrive at the station as they unveil the statue, which I think is just perfect. Now, as I said, every single day at 3 PM Hachiko would turn up at the train station. However, on the 8th of March 1935, Hachiko failed to arrive at the station. Sadly, the beloved faithful dog was found lying dead in the street. Hachiko's lifeless body was fittingly taken to the train station's baggage room, apparently a place he frequently visited. It was there that he was gently laid down on the floor, whilst members of the train station all crowded around him for one last photograph. Ueno's widow can also be seen in the photograph, who had arrived at the station to show her respects to Hachiko for one last time. Hachiko had died of natural causes. Apparently the poor dog had cancer and a filaria infection. There was also 4 food skewers found in his stomach, but this didn't harm the dog in any way. After his death, Hachiko's remains were cremated and his ashes were buried next to his owner, Professor Ueno. And at long last, Hachiko was now reunited with his best friend. Hachiko's fur had been preserved and stuffed and mounted, and this was placed on display at the National Science Museum in Japan, and it's still there to this day. During his life and afterwards, Hachiko became an icon for loyalty and was used as an example for faithfulness for school kids all over Japan. The statue I mentioned that was built in 1934 was sadly melted down to be used for supplies in World War II. But in 1948, the son of the original artist rebuilt the statue, and that is the exact same statue you can find there today, standing proud for all to see in the exact spot Hachiko waited all those years. And apparently, on the anniversary of Hachiko's death, people will come from far and wide, as they did when he was alive, and leave the dog gifts at the feet of the statue. But this is not the only piece of art that celebrates Hachiko's life and loyalty. There's also a beautiful mosaic on the station wall in front of the exit where the dog waited. This is now called the Hachiko exit. And even the floor is decorated in colourful paw prints, and the manhole covers are decorated in Hachiko's image. In 2015, the University of Tokyo revealed a statue in honour of Professor Ueno and his dog. And I think this is my favourite. The statue shows Ueno and Hachiko finally reunited, with Hachiko happily jumping up to greet his master, and Ueno's briefcase can be seen on the floor next to him as he embraces his friend. And there are many more tributes scattered around Japan in honour of Hachiko. Now, if you remember, I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that Ueno named Hachiko Hachi. Hachi was actually his real name. You see, the ko part was actually added later on. Now, let me tell you why. Now, apparently the ko part of his name is a word that expresses affection in Japanese, and this was added in recognition of Hachi's loyalty to his owner. There's also a movie named Hachi, and I remember thinking that the movie had gotten the name wrong or simply changed it for the American audience. However, when I was researching this episode, I discovered I was dead wrong about that. So his name was actually Hachi, but the ko part in the name represented loyalty. And I think that's a beautiful thing. However, the movie that I just mentioned is very good. The story was changed slightly, now taking place in modern America, but many of the details are more or less the same. It was released in 2009 and is called Hachi, A Dog's Tale, and it stars Richard Gere. Now, like I said, it is a very good film, but I must warn you, it's a very sad film and it will pull at your heartstrings. And before I end this episode, I am going to tell you what happened in the end of the movie. It won't spoil anything, because as I just told you, the real story, you kind of already